Unspoken Issues.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast. My goodness, we are back and we are going to be discussing some DC comics this go round. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking some Spectre comics. That's Dean Compton over there. He's giving some deep thought into some Spectre-related sandwiches. That up there is Darry Waite. I'm Jesse Starcher. I've got questions already because I've never read. I know the Spectre. All right. I know about the Spectre. I really remember when Hal Jordan became the Spectre. That was the big thing. That was the big thing for me. I know the Spectre's been around forever before that, but I've kind of got to throw this around here real quick.
Just a little.
Just a little. He's got a little bit of history. Jim Corrigan's got a little bit of history with the Spectre there. But yeah, I mean, first off, it's called The Spear of Destiny, issues 19 through 22 of the Spectre comics. And for the longest time, I thought on the cover, does it say The Spectre or is it just Spectre? I see your Spectre there.
It
says The Spectre.
I thought it said The Spectre. This is volume 3, so.
And so I was looking it up. I see your Spectre Funko there. It's nice.
Great, right?
Very nice. So
I'm a mark.
Wow. Dean, okay. I know this was your idea, right?
What is it? Anything bad that happens on this show was not my idea. Anything good that happens on this show was my idea.
Okay, there you go. So do me a favor.
Sure.
I guess number one, give me your history with the Spectre. Is this a read for you that you've read for quite a while, or were you reading this back in the day? Tell me about the Spectre.
Sit under the learning tree for a minute, kid.
All right. Learn me
So
more.
actually, the first time I heard of the Spectre, my mom had to go to this doctor in Little Rock to see a specialist, and I got to go. And on the way back, we went to the mall and went to the KB toy store, which is a big deal because we didn't have a mall in Batesville. And they had DC Cosmic cards. They didn't have the Marvel cards. They started getting the Marvel cards. They didn't have any. All they had was DC Cosmic cards. So I got a couple packs of those. And one of them was a card about the Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it was part of a 3-card like deal. Like there were 3 Crisis on Infinite Earths cards. But this one was like the Spectre was squaring off with the Anti-Monitor. I'd never heard of this fucking guy. But it looked cool as hell.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I asked Mom about him, and because for whatever reason, I was from Mom about superheroes. Like she was like a big fan or something. I was like, "Hey, Mom, how's the Spectre?" Like, no shit from Apple Butter about this, but I would ask her anyway. I guess it's kind of like the old story. Like there's a drunk guy looking for his keys under a street light, and somebody goes to help him, and like after a little bit, the guy who comes to help is like, "Where'd you lose him anyway?" He's like, "Oh, I lost him across the street." Like, well, why are you looking here? It's like, this is where the light is. So I had to ask her, who else was going to, until I became friends with a local DJ, I didn't have a lot of people to ask or talk to about this kind of stuff. So she kind of remembered the Spectre, but, didn't really know a whole lot about it. Eventually, I would get to talk to Ben Johnson, who was a local DJ, and he informed me about the Spectre and, how it was like, basically like the wrath of God incorporated into like a human vessel. And then I started reading like All-Star Squadron. I got into the Justice Society and I learned the Spectre was a huge part of that. As I learned that like comic book history, like Jerry Siegel, co-creator of Superman, co-created the Spectre. There's a very important character for those reasons. One of those characters that like you'll see him in like the 60s and Neil Adams is drawing him juggle planets. In the fucking 80s, Doug Minch did a series where he's basically a private detective. And then I think you come to the magnum opus of the Spectre, which is Ostrander and Mandrake's work on Volume 3. John Ostrander, I think, is the most underrated comic book writer in history. I think he had a masterpiece with Grimjack. He had a masterpiece with Suicide Squad, of course, along with his late partner, Kim Yale. Then he had a masterpiece here with the Spectre. And he's done a lot of other good work, too. Firestorm, Heroes for Hire, good run on Punisher. But, like, these are just, like, 3 absolute knocked out of the ballpark, runs. And we just don't talk enough about them. I love the idea of the Spectre, that this is the wrath of God, but he's sort of confused. He needs earthly guidance because otherwise, we'd all be judged. We'd all be damned, It's like
right.
Romans 3:10, as it is written, there are none righteous, no, not one. And like Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And if we're going to be very strict about judgment, then then apparently none of us passed this mark. And that's not what the Spectre is here for. So you get this series here where like John Ostrander was not afraid of going after those metaphysical questions. He wasn't afraid of the power level of the Spectre. That's something that a lot of people have been upset about before. Like when they've tried to write it, like, I can't write the Spectre, he can do anything. He's like, no, that's part of the beauty of it. It's all about this metaphysical, almost force of nature that is essentially does God's dirty work, who has been attached to a human who has to like funnel everything through the lens of both the divine and the mortal to figure out exactly what their purpose is and what they should do. And that's what this whole series is about. In the end, it wraps up beautifully. Everything's really, really done well from start to finish in this series. This may be the best 4 issues of it. It's certainly Wizard loved it back in the day. I think the cover of 22 is like iconic, where Superman's holding the Spear of Destiny against the Spectre. And I just love the Spectre, since I saw that card. I think it's a simple look, but a good one, a character that you can do anything with. And most importantly, somebody I could brag to people about knowing about when I was a kid that they didn't know about, so that I can feel better about myself. That's the most important thing.
Most importantly.
Most important thing. I know that was a bit of a rant, but I'm the Spectre guy here. So that's
all right.
But I chose it because I thought y'all would really love this one. I think it's an incredible 4-issue story that, like, if you don't like the Spectre after this, you're probably just not going to like the Spectre. Well, Jesse's like, well, then I don't like the Spectre.
Getting into the cosmic level stuff, it's hard enough for me to do that with Marvel sometimes. And then you throw me into the cosmic level DC, I'm way out of my element then.
Yeah, Spectre's weird because he's both, he's cosmic and magic. He's one of those guys, like... He's not a lot like Adam Warlock, but there's a similarity there where Adam Warlock does like magic shit, but also he's like, but look at this cosmic gem, and
Right.
So yeah, I get what you're saying.
Darry, how about you, man? Were you picking up Spectre issues off of the shelves?
No, but Spectre 22 was the first Spectre comic I ever read because I was obsessed with Alex Ross. And I was trying to get every comic I could that had his. So I read Spectre 22 not long after it came out, relatively at least. And I was very confused. I don't even think at the time I realized it was part of a larger story. So I just had like one more random long-haired Superman comic, but I was like, that's a great cover. And then, Jesse, to your point, when Hal Jordan becomes the Spectre, I did buy every issue of that book. I think it was by... Are you
kidding me? Like, nobody, you guys are the ones. Like, this run of Spectre Volume 4 sold 2 copies a month, and apparently it was to you too. Jesse,
it was us.
Cyberforce and the Spectre on hold. They're like, they don't publish Cyberforce anymore. It's 1999, assholes. I don't care. You keep a marker in there just in case.
Yeah, you make sure.
Listen. If Bucky can come back, so can Heatwave.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Damn it.
Real. I haven't read a lot of that one. I did enjoy the Day of Judgment mini that went into that. Go on with your Spectre experiences, though, because it's just funny. It's the most I've ever heard about that run.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I read Day of Judgment because like back then I would read every crossover. I figured they were all important, and I didn't know.
Can't miss anything.
What did I know? And then you get to the end of that book and, spoilers for a pretty old comic, but, Hal Jordan comes back, saves the day. You get a cameo by the not yet resurrected Green Lantern Corps, and then suddenly he is the Spectre, and he begins this long Vegeta-esque redemption arc that eventually, many years later, will end in Green Lantern Rebirth, and he's currently the Green Lantern of Earth. So someone somewhere did something right. But I was just intrigued. I was like, what? This is a character who I remember very clearly going down a very bad path from the death of Superman and Mongols destroying Coast City and Parallax and Emerald Twilight and all that stuff. And suddenly it's like, can this guy be a hero again? And the answer is, well, yeah, probably, except most of the stories are going to... That was a very metaphysical run. I think that was
didn't J.M. DeMatteis write it?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. A lot of those... I love the guy. I think he does good work. But a lot of those stories going to end in a hug.
That's well said. That's well said. And then, like you said, I went back.
There's necessarily anything wrong with that, but there's not as much guys punching guys and somehow solving problems from it that you come to expect from a superhero comic.
Well said. I was also very fascinated by the fact that the Spectre was co-created by Jerry Siegel. I love the idea that after striking gold with Superman, well, someone struck gold with Superman. He didn't necessarily strike gold with Superman. He created the Spectre, who is, still around today, still very popular and still very iconic, but also incredibly different from Superman. So I thought it was great to see this legacy carry on, and you guys said all the interesting parts, but the Spectre is just one of those great high concept characters. Like the wrath of God from the Bible is in human form.
Right.
And
I killed the Egyptians on Passover.
Man, that's a concept. That's a concept that can be used in many different ways. I would say quite often some of my least favorite Spectre stories are when he is with the Justice Society of America, because, Jesse mentioned, like, what do you do with a guy who's that powerful? And it's just like, well, then it gets kind of rough. But there are good stories too, because at the same time he's potentially all powerful, but he's also in a very Christ-like way. He's limited by human capacity and by his host. So it's interesting too to see what he will get away with, what he won't get away with, and just have him standing next to the cyborg or whomever every time they're having like a big team up, and it's like, okay, that's the wrath of God. That's the guy with half a metal face. It's only in comics, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
To point out how different he was, and also to kind of talk about him as part of the Justice Society. When they first do it, talk about how different he was from Superman. Like, the early Spectre stuff is like hard-boiled detective shit. Like, a lot of times, like, he's a dead cop who comes back, but then he mostly, like, punches a guy. And so for a while, I don't think that Jim Corrigan recognizes the implicit limitations of being dead. So at that point, he feels like he's having camaraderie with the JSA because they're all out there punching guys called, like, I don't know, Mr. Nazi Spy or some bullshit that, like, you're like, how the fuck can that be somebody's name? But then as he grows, he learns more. He's like, I'm not really, like them. And then, yeah, we get to see some of that happen here. But it is funny because as he grows more into his role, it does become funny where it's like, okay, all right, the world's fastest man, sure, he's hanging out with that guy. And the guy with the magic ring who can do anything except affect wood, sure, he hangs out with that guy. Super powerful magician guy, yeah, sure. And also this really short guy who's really good at fighting. Boy, Al Pratt sure is in shape. It becomes like funny. It's like, oh yeah, Spectre, his good friend, Dr. Midnight. Yeah, the Spectre's the wrath of God. What does Dr. Midnight do? Well, he's blind, but he can see at night. He has an owl. Like, okay, that's it? He's also a medical doctor. All right. Well, so yeah, later on it does seem somewhat silly, but at the time it's groundbreaking. It's groundbreaking. In not just this medium, but like almost every medium. Like the idea that like there would be team up shows or crossover shows later, in like regular television, it all kind of stems from that All-Star Comics #3.
So talking about John Ostrander, I'm looking at Mike's Amazing World of Comics here, and just taking a look at his history, it looks like they've got his first entry here on this. Now, granted, it may not be his first work, but looks like, well, speaking the word first, that was the publisher that he was writing
first comics,
for.
Right?
First
like
Comics, right?
Yeah. Because he's out of the Chicago school. He knew Mike Gold and those guys.
Okay, all right.
He's actually like a playwright when he got into comics, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, a Star Slayer. It looks like he's got quite a few stories written there. Grimjack.
Fools too. What a great fucking comic book. Yeah, it's fucking sick.
Oh, wow.
The guy literally kills the fucking sun. It's beautiful.
That's insane. It makes sense. Star Slayer. Yeah, first, it looks like 1986, he plotted DC's Legends #1. It looks like that's his first work listed here for DC. So, yeah, mainly Ostrander's...
starts to do Suicide Squad.
Okay, yeah, you'd mentioned that there. And did this guy ever leave to go to Marvel at all? It doesn't look like...
He did,
wait, I'm sorry.
Later in like 95, he did Heroes for Hire. He did Quicksilver in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So, he may have done some... I think he did a couple Westerns for them, too. Like, I think he did Blaze of Glory or something.
Okay. Got to give a shout-out to his Valiant work here. Magnus Robot Fighter.
Yep.
Ryan the Future Force, a few issues there too.
Yeah, Ryan the Future Force. That's a bad name.
then let's see. I think there was some Eternal Warrior listed there too. So, all right.
He wrote that for a little bit too.
Definitely own a few issues.
And he
of
did
this
like
guy's
the Martian Manhunter solo series also with Tom Mandrake, which I haven't read all of, but what I've read is really good. And I get the feeling that when I'm done with it, I will feel like it is also a masterpiece.
I've read every issue of that series. I'm a fan.
Very nice.
Do you think Ostrander is underrated? Do you think he's unrecognized, Darry?
Yeah. Oh, incredibly so. Yeah.
Wildly so, right? Like this is like somebody being like, "Oh man, I like baseball." And you're like, yeah, do you like Willie Mays? Who's Willie Mays? Like, do you like Mike Trout? Who's I've never heard of him. Are you sure you like, but because I've said this to people, but then you say the shit, right? Like you're like Suicide Squad, Grimjack, Martian Manhunter, that Punisher run. So
I am a fan of Ostrander, however you pronounce it. I've read a lot of his work. A lot of his stuff was coming out right when I was really, really into it. So he was a formative presence for me. And just to go back to Suicide Squad, there is a reason that property has been as successful as it was. That original run by him and his collaborators in the late 80s is fantastic. And it
all the way to the end.
Yeah, it holds up. It touches every corner of the DC universe. And Amanda Waller is one of the best fictional characters of all time, full stop.
Oh, for sure. And also, like, it's so funny because it's one of those ideas because, to come full circle, the Suicide Squad's like created in the 60s, but they're like, basically like an A-team type thing, like they're like, we go in where there's missions that can't be done, and it's not bad or anything, but it's fairly, run of the mill. But the idea that the government would take supervillains and offer them pardons and money to do dirty work for the government is so great of an idea. I feel like everyone in the fucking business had to have been jealous they didn't think of it. Because it's like so obvious. It's right there. Like, of course that's what they would do.
Man, I was taking a look through here at Tom Mandrake's career as well.
You can't sell that guy short. Fucking
right, man. Yeah, looking like first entry here back in 1980. But man, yeah, he's right there along with Ostrander all the way through the end, most of the series.
Yeah, it's referred to as like the Ostrander and Mandrake Spectre a lot of time because like he does almost every issue. He does almost all of Martian Manhunter too. These guys groks in a way that like when it happens, like you talk about something like like Claremont Byrne. Like when it comes together, there's just nothing like that creative synergy. These guys just had it. Yeah. And that's not me, you can listen to me say it, or you can go find their interviews. They'll say the same thing. Like, they loved working together, and they always seem to be on the same page.
There is a book that came out in 2008 that Mandrake did, Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves.
Yeah, I've read that. It's not very good, but his art's good.
I was going to say, the art's probably on par. I don't know who Kevin Van Hook is.
The best part of that book is when they get Green Arrow.
Okay.
Because Batman's like, yeah, listen, I know somebody who can take out a lot of vampires pretty quick.
All right. Well, let's go ahead, hop in here, and talk about what we've come to the show for, and that is Spear of Destiny. So, yeah, I mean, when you start talking Spear of Destiny, you title your story that, I mean, I kind of know at least a little bit about what we may be getting in this series. In these few issues with the Spear of Destiny. That's one of the I don't consider myself an occult guy or anything like that, but I'm if you read comic books or you
I consider you an occult guy.
Okay, thank you.
I'm always like, hey, if there's somebody doing a seance or something, I bet it's old Jesse. I bet Jesse's over there just making salt pentagrams and summoning incubi. I bet that's old Jesse.
I'm telling you right now, the backdrop I had to put up just because the pentagram was coming through in the video.
You're like, I'm sorry about all the goat skulls, guys.
My apologies.
For real, go on. You're not an occult guy, but go on.
I know enough. I've watched my X-Files. I probably and all that. So like Spear of Destiny, I kind of knew what we were going to be getting into. So again, we've already talked a little bit about the creative team here. Tom Mandrake, John Ostrander writing this. John Ridgway pops in here for an issue, I think.
He does a great job too.
Yeah.
It fits right in.
Lettered by Todd Klein and colored by Carla Feeney. So this hits
Todd Klein's the man, right? Like, can you imagine a better letterer?
I can tell you that I was very impressed. Very impressed.
That dude, like everything he touches, like it's just like like it's him. He's like one of the only guys I can say that about. Except for also old Jesse. He's got some handwriting now.
Yeah, wait till you see my Sanskrit, ladies and gentlemen.
That's what I'm going to call you from now on. I'm like, let me tell you something. Old Jesse.
Old Jesse. When I became an uncle and became Uncle Jesse, I thought it was the greatest thing ever because
Sure.
All right.
What a time to be alive.
Oh, no kidding. Hits the shelves April of 1994. So that's where we were at when this got onto the comic book shelves. So let's talk about the synopsis here real quick. And this is we the first issue is it definitely feels kind of separate from or just a kind of a lead in, maybe to kind of showcase the Spectre's power. But Dean and Darry, you feel free to chime in here. Well, actually, at the end of this, I would love to get your opinion on this first issue. The story begins with Mai Miyazaki, who transforms into a being called Naiad after being engulfed in spilled oil on the sea and lit a fire. Empowered by Gaia, the soul of the world, Naiad seeks revenge on those who harm the earth. Okay, so base level, there you go. That's one of the big villains that's going to be showing up here. Meanwhile, racial tensions escalate between Jewish and African American communities in a place called the Enclave. Rabbi Jacob Shulman is acquitted after a tragic accident where he drove his car into a group of African American children, killing a young boy. The Spectre, the cosmic entity of divine vengeance, arrives on the scene to judge Shulman, but discovers it was an accident and refrains from condemning him. However, the hatred and tension among the crowd outside summon two malevolent entities that feed upon the hatred. The Spectre fights these hate entities, but soon realizes that Asmodus, is that the name? Asmodus. A Hellspawn is behind their appearance, which he kind of shows up, and Spectre's like, be gone, man. And he begat. He got out of there. But from what I understand, just looking at the wiki, Asmodus is like a common enemy of...
Yeah, he fights again. And again, Asmodus is like the name of a demon or an angel that becomes a demon in the Bible. I can't remember, what it is. And also, not to be confused with like Asmodeus, an angel who turns rogue who will fight the JLA not long out, like about 4 years after this. So,
there's a couple times when I've had like...
There's a lot of evil angels in the DC universe. It's something they do.
I've kept trying to say Asmodeus a lot for some reason.
Right. I mean, they've used both terms, but like, yeah, it makes sense. Like this, I can't remember. I've read this story so long ago, but they don't like each other and their histories are intertwined, and it has to do with their metaphysical roles with the source or the presence, God, however you're going to say it.
So even after the Spectre shows up and like gets these entities, I mean, it's not like he is not visible fighting these things. These things are like the size of buildings as they're fighting, it looks like. This is happening all in front of these two communities that are clashing, and tensions still rise. And the Spectre tries to go down there and attempts to quell the violence. It kind of works, kind of doesn't. Meanwhile, President Clinton seeks a way to control or destroy the Spectre, believing he has gone insane. Professor Nicodemus Hazard investigates the Spectre's history and learns of the Spear of Destiny, a mystical artifact capable of controlling or destroying the Spectre. Unbeknownst to Hazard, the Spear has a corrupting influence on its possessors. The story also explores...
Another terrible thing Hitler did.
Oh, yes. It also explores the Spectre's internal struggles as he grapples with a sense of justice and the consequence of his actions. As the plot unfolds, Naiad confronts the Spectre, accusing him of hypocrisy for denying her vengeance. So she shows up and she is upset with the oil company. Essentially, she's like, what, in the water elemental?
Yeah, she comes from, actually, Ostrander brought her over from his run on Firestorm. There was like an elemental war that Swamp Thing was involved in. Firestorm's the fire elemental. Red Tornado becomes the wind elemental, the air elemental, and then Naiad is the water elemental. And indeed, her human side or whatever was like killed by this oil company, because she was like, hey, don't be doing oil stuff here. And she sailed out to the middle of a big slick where they polluted. And they're like, let's light it on fire and kill her. What's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is she would get attached to the water elemental Naiad. And then like they have their war. I haven't read it, so I don't know how it come, but I think things were settled. And now this is like a resurfacing of her, of Naiad, now more under the control of Gaia than the original Maya Miyazuki. I can't remember.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. So that's the way I understood that. But this is Ostrander brought a lot of characters that he had messed with prior over here. Like Father Jim Kramer was in Suicide Squad.
Okay.
And this Dyad was a character that he messed with a lot in Firestorm. So, it's a really neat thing to see this guy always, obviously, you think about it, Spectre needs like some kind of religious guide. He already had this guy created. Why make a new guy? Especially when like nobody gives a shit. You can do whatever you want with Father Jim, like
right.
It's not like he's like, hey, I need to do something with Dr. Fate or Shazam or something. We don't know so much about that. What about this guy I made up who's been in one comic? I don't even know what you're talking about, asshole.
Go for it.
I figure somebody at DC, when this approved, just thought this would be a critical success that they would cancel somewhere in the first 2 years. But it's a nice run.
Yeah, I was going to say 60-some issues is nothing to sneeze at. So
and an annual.
Right. So Naiad confronts the Spectre, accusing him of hypocrisy for denying her vengeance. So she's wanting to take. Yeah, she's wanting to take. I mean, hey, if any guy's going to understand vengeance, it's the Spectre.
Well, especially because what happened right before this is he judged this. It's kind of like a pastiche for the Balkan conflicts that were going on at the time. And he just killed everybody in these two countries except for their leaders and was like, I judge all of you. You all fucking suck. You two can live, and now I guess you can fight over what's left. Congratulations, guys. That's why he needs somebody like Jim Cramer, where you're like, Spec.
Think about it, man.
Bro. I know you meant well. I'm not sure that killing all these kids was the right way to go about it.
Right. Yeah,
that's a fucking hypocrite to an extent.
And that's important because it's brought up in the story quite a few times. I think it's Valatov or Vlatov or something like that. I can't remember the name of Vlatava. So
the big V.
Not touching that. So the Spectre is seeking to understand Naiad's anger. Goes into the soul plane, I think. He's like upset. He's like, okay, let's go into the soul plane. I'll see you there because I can't hurt you out here. And what he ends up encountering is Gaia, which is essentially the representation of Earth. So she reveals herself to be the source of Naiad's power. All right. Now, things are about to pick up, ladies and gentlemen, because Superman gets involved when he is tasked with using the Spear of Destiny against the Spectre. I'm going to go ahead and say this. You guys feel free to comment here in a few, but this felt like, my goodness, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, where's the Spear of Destiny? In a warehouse that the U.S. government has, along with a bunch of other stuff. And that's where Hazard ends up finding the Spear of Destiny. He goes and gets it. It's so funny because he's got to talk these guys into finding it first in that warehouse, and then grabs the Spear of Destiny, goes to the president. The president's like, here, Superman, do us a favor. Can you go talk to the Spectre a little bit? Maybe talk him down. But what they don't understand at the time when they give him the spear is the fact that it's cursed, and the spear's dark influence tempts old Superman to violence. Not only that, like, it's more than that. Like, it's like you can rule. You can rule the world. It will corrupt you if you own it. I think I've said that 20 times already, so bear with me.
Yeah, 21 now.
Ultimately, the Spectre induces a vision for Superman to free him from the spear's control. We got to talk about that, but we're just going to call it a vision for right now, to free him from the spear's control. Realizing the importance of balance and temperance, the Spectre entombs the Spear of Destiny and hurls it into space. The story concludes with the Spectre learning a valuable lesson
in a skull asteroid.
It's pretty cool.
It is really cool. Like, let's be honest. One thing you will never accuse the Spectre of, from like, let's say like the 70s on, when it's the Jim Aparo, Michael Fleischer, like cutting people in half with scissors and shit, and like people's faces melting, or like turning somebody into grass and then mowing them. Like, you will never accuse the Spectre of being like, like boring.
Yeah,
like Spectre is always a little extra. You can't just like throw the spear away. Got to wrap it in an asteroid with skull and be like, maybe somebody will find that later.
Throws it on into space. Spectre learns a valuable lesson about the temptation of power and the need for balance within himself. We don't have to go issue by issue. There's only 4 issues here, but let's just go ahead and start real quick and talk about our first issue, because there's some heavy topics going on there. We have the Enclave, which is a Jewish community, and we have the rabbi who accidentally killed somebody. Clearly, the African American community is really upset about what happened because this guy got acquitted. Wow, you could look at that in 2023. You could probably see some stuff there. The bulk of our first issue is about that conflict, the Spectre showing up and kind of trying to, like, he doesn't really smooth things over. He's like, shows up and says, get out of here.
The Spectre's not known for his light touch. He's the fucking angel of vengeance, the wrath of God. It's not like, right. He's like, listen. What I really work at is being settled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so me saying that he's coming over to smooth things over, that's not the case. No, he's just like, hey.
Yeah, he's going to come smooth things over with a chainsaw.
Pretty much. This ends, he shows up, this ends now. We get the fight between the two hate demons, and then Asmodeus shows up, says it's with me all along, and then Spectre sends him off. But
I mean, I really liked it. I don't know that there may be an exact thing that this is based on, but it seemed to me to be a lot of amalgamations of several instances of tension in cities between different minorities, Black people and Jewish people in this instance. And I don't know, I think they did a pretty good job without being too trite of trying to, solve a very complicated situation, or at least explain a complicated situation to where, people can kind of see both sides. I like the rabbi a lot, especially the part where the Spectre goes to judge him, and the Spectre's like, "You know who I am?" He's like, "Oh, I know exactly who you fucking are." And he's like, and I love where he's like, "I did it. I may have murdered the kid." And the Spectre's like, "It's not like that. It's sad. You committed the sin of pride, obviously, but this was not your intent. We're not going to judge you based on this. It sucks, but." I think that's an important lesson that the Spectre's trying to learn as he tries to take on the idea of getting justice with mercy for the purposes of vengeance on a more individual level. Because when he tried to solve the world's problem, he just killed all these people. Yeah. And now he's trying to find a different way. I think the page where he puts the scale up is just really, really great. I also think the page where they show atrocities that were committed to Jewish people during World War II with the Holocaust and concentration camps, and also what happened to Black people here with lynchings, the KKK, slavery, because there's a really well-drawn picture where the Spectre is showing both the rabbi and the guy whose son was killed by the rabbi, each other's grief. And you're led to believe that the rabbi had a son who died in the Holocaust. You know what I mean? So he understands losing a son, and the rabbi passes on, and I assume he goes wherever Jewish rabbis who are good people go, who, with a couple spots go when they die. I'm not familiar enough with Jewish faith to say. And I know why they had to do the Asmodeus stuff and why he's like, oh, look, there's these demons. But, it cheapens it a little. I think they do a good job where they continue to fight even after the demons are gone, because these demons didn't have to be there for there to be this tension. You have two groups of people who are used to being historically persecuted, and you have two groups of people who are used to not getting justice, because the status quo has denigrated and denied them such. So I really appreciated, showing that the Jewish people are entrenching and the Black people are like, where's our justice? The Jewish people are like, where's ours? May not be an easy answer here, and I think they do a good job of not trying to proclaim one, but so much is sorrow is sorrow and grief is grief, and both sides had their tragedies. To lighten things up at the end, I do enjoy where we learn you got Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton, talking about smoking weed. So that's pretty cool. Bill Clinton's all like, oh, I didn't inhale. I'm like, well, let me tell you something. I've been inhaling, Bill, so you don't have to worry about it.
I might be at a disadvantage for not reading. I mean, I knew there was this issue at the end where they were talking about how the Spectre had went off and killed these people. It's not rehashed at the beginning. It's not like, hey, to catch up, everybody, by the way, which is fine with me. I didn't need that. But I think if I would have known that, this whole situation that the Spectre was involved in here, you might be sitting there wondering, is the Spectre going to go off again? Is he going to level this community now? Is this a situation where oh my goodness, now we're just going to have a flattened part of wherever this is at? Yeah. There is a lot that's being said here, because you have these two groups of people that are really incensed. They're really upset with each other. The Spectre shows up, fights demons the size of buildings, and it doesn't stop. Me, I'd be running because I'd be afraid for my life, but that isn't the case. So that's the kind of unfortunate situation that hateful misunderstanding can get you into. So I think that's another thing that they're probably driving at here.
This issue was very heavy. This is not a kid's comic. I did like it, but I don't know. This was probably my least favorite issue of the entire story. And it's got a lot of self-contained plots.
Yes.
It doesn't feature the Justice Society. It doesn't feature someone with a magic spear. It doesn't feature Superman. It's very grounded, and it also shows how violence and wrath and all of these other things that the Spectre is supposed to represent make things worse, right? The only way he's able to rectify the situation or really have any positive impact is when he says, okay, you two are going to understand each other in a way that only I can do, right? It's empathy, it's
Right.
connection, it's seeing that you're leaves on the same tree. You're not different trees, you're not different anything. So I did like that, and that's a classic Ostrander. Like, superpower doesn't necessarily make the situation better, but figuring out how to make a connection does. So I thought that was very good. But up until then, it was like, oh man, I just kept thinking I would have hated this when it came out. when I was reading, because I would have been like, oh man, racism and violence and the church and I don't want anything to do with any of this.
I can see where you're coming from, Darry. Trust me, because and a lot of this was I was like, is this what the whole story's going to be about? Is that what we're getting? Like, this is because I thought we were going to continue some kind of a story involving these two people having these issues. I thought the guy with the gun that was like, oh, let's go get him, and I was like, oh, we're going to follow this guy. This is going to be the main antagonist of this book. That's not the case. I think honestly, I know this is part one of the story, but like part one is like what, 2 pages, if that,
Yeah.
of what the story is actually going to be. So if you're just a superhero guy looking for good old superhero stuff, this is probably not where you're going to be looking for good old superhero stuff. It's
Until
that's the reason that a lot of the covers would eventually say, like I said, suggested for mature readers. Like, no, that doesn't always just mean that there's like titties and heads getting blown off. I mean, it sometimes means that like, hey, this subject matter isn't necessarily what you'd expect to find. But that's the theme of this book throughout. It asks a lot of questions. I don't know if you ever get a lot of answers, but it's like, what is justice? What is righteousness? What is vengeance? What is God? What's God's plan for things?
I think it gives you an answer to all of those. It says,
I don't know that it really does.
I think it says that the answer is compassion. The answer is you can be angry at your neighbor as much as you want, but at the end of the day, if you can find a way to understand them, and here it's the MacGuffin of the Spectre merging them together, that's really the only thing we have. That is the closest thing we're going to have to the divine is compassion. Maybe that is my very, 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 very lapsed Catholic upbringing, but it's really just
actually, I don't disagree with you. I was speaking of those concepts on a metaphysical level. But you're right. As far as like, I think when it breaks down every religion and almost every disagreement between them or between different groups of people, it really does come down to eventually somebody being brave enough to be compassionate. And in those times, I feel like that is when we do touch the divine, the spark in us that is the divine as well. I mean, a lot of people don't talk about it very often, but like, I believe in God and I have a very quiet belief and I go about my day because I think it's a matter of faith and not fact. So I don't really feel the need to talk to a lot of people about it. But I do agree with you, that compassion, the moments when you're like trying to help and trying to overcome problems, especially by, again, being brave enough to not, be hateful. That's where we find God day in, day out. So I totally agree with you there. It's a different kind of metaphysics than I was talking about.
I do love that, speaking about this not being a superhero comic, it is at the end because you suddenly get a brand new character whose name is Professor Nicodemus Hazard. And I was so disappointed to look up after that he has not appeared anywhere else, because if you had told me if you had told me that he became a drinking partner with John Constantine or a pen pal with Willoughby Kipling or was sleeping at Baron Winter's house, I would have been all about it. I would read that miniseries. But he shows up.
Grant Morrison time, they'll discover it. They'll get them in soon. Just give Grant Morrison time.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Like this guy totally fits in with that trench coat brigade feel, but it's never really used elsewhere. But I don't get the feeling that they were denied John Constantine. I think they wanted their own character.
Oh yeah,
it doesn't feel like a Constantine pastiche at all.
No, not at all. I was just using those as an example. Hazard is your he's Willard from Apocalypse Now. The action is happening around him for the rest of the story, right? He talks to the Justice Society. He gets their part. You see their story. He doesn't wield the Spear of Destiny, but he allows Superman to be able to wield it. So I liked it. Constantine would have been, having his own agenda. He would have been the antagonist. It would have been too much. You needed someone who was on a lower level. I just like the name. Yeah, and I just like the fact that the Oval Office has a at the time it would have been an entry in a Rolodex that says, hey, we need someone who can fall asleep, access the dreaming, and find out arcane knowledge because we don't yet have Google.
From a book that they won't write.
Yeah, man,
right,
that
exactly.
is great.
Exactly.
Oh, it's great stuff. The character that he's running into there in the dreaming, is that somebody that's been around for a while?
Oh, yeah, that's Lucian, the librarian from Sandman. And honestly, I wanted to bring this up. What a fucking moment, because you didn't see a lot of the Vertigo guys appearing in DC titles at this time. The Spectre was one of those titles you would kind of call was like a bridge title. Like the Phantom Stranger could do Vertigo shit, but then he could be in the Spectre. Swamp Thing could do Vertigo shit, but he could be in the Spectre. But for the most part, they kept these lines very strongly demarcated. So to see Lucian was wow, awesome. I also really, really love the song Luck of Lucian by A Tribe Called Quest. Everybody should listen. A Tribe Called Quest, one of the greatest groups of all time. And everybody should fucking listen to them. You should at least listen to that song. What a fucking jam. And I always think of it whenever I see his name. They don't really go together at all, but it's a good vibe.
That's great. We mentioned the Justice Society. Let's talk about it. That happens in issue 2.
My favorite superhero team of all time.
Yeah, buddy. The Justice Society shows up as Nicodemus Hazard as he's trying to do, basically he's just doing some research, trying to find out how can we handle this problem, the Spectre. And he's...
Yeah, because I don't think he wants to kill him or anything. He's legitimately being like, you guys used to be his friend when he was fucking lifting ships like they were the ship. Remember those ads when you read 70s and 80s comics and they're like, Task Force Navy, send away and you'll get 85,000 ships or however fucking many there are. You remember those?
Oh, yeah.
And they had similar ones for the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. If you ever seen pictures of them, they're apparently shitty. In my mind, they were amazing. But it's he was playing with those ships, right? He's just what do you want? Going to fucking juggle some battleships for a little bit.
Yeah,
that's off for these. You can't stop me, God.
The opening page is exactly how you're describing it there, with him with this massive battleship in his hands while the Justice Society is flying all around him. So yeah, he's going and talking to all the senior members of the, and I say senior, I mean they've gotten up there in age, folks, of the Justice Society. He's learning a little bit more of the Spectre as he goes along. So you get your appearances of Hawkman. Oh my goodness.
Hawkwoman.
And Hawkwoman. Carter, help me out.
Carter and Shira Saunders? No, Hall.
Hall. Yeah, Carter Hall. Okay,
Saunders is later.
Right. He goes and talks to somebody we discussed, Sandman, Wesley Dodds. He gets to talk to him.
Oh, yeah.
The
Golden Age Sandman himself.
That's right. So he's getting around and talking to all the older members of the Justice Society and learning more and more about it.
When I was very young, we would go to the flea market, and this one lady, and she was not very nice, let me have you know. She had long box after long box of quarter DC comics. I remember seeing y'all ever see The World's Finest with the super kids, like Batman Jr. and Superman Jr. back in the 70s? She had a bunch of those. She had Legion of Superheroes, and she had all these All-Star Squadrons. I'm a World War II mark. One of the first things I read when I was a kid was the World War II encyclopedia entry. I loved the maps. I would be oh, this is how it worked. This is why the Germans lost at El Alamein, I'll have you understand. It had a lot to do with supply lines. And so, when I learned these guys were fighting during the Second World War, I was automatically, just entranced by that idea. And then, I got to learn more, and I'm I'm a history buff, period, but I really get into the history of anything I'm into. Y'all can tell, I know a lot about, all of my interests, wrestling, music, comic books, baseball, what have you. And so they really crossed over. And so, I just could not get my hand on enough Justice Society stuff. At the same time, the Straczynski Parabek Justice Society drops. And that is such a good comic book. It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun. I saw this stuff around the time that I lost my dad when he killed himself and stuff. And like, it was weird because I felt like, this sounds so stupid, but I felt like Jay Garrick and Greenland and Alan Scott were like, they were now my grandpas. And like I could like lean on them in a way. I didn't have a dad when my mom's dad died when she was young, and my dad's dad was, you know, I don't know where the fuck he was by then. It sounds weird, but I just leaned on them in a way. And like, and again, the more I learned about the Justice Society, the more I liked them, the more I liked the idea. Then I discovered like Infinity Incorporated and the 70s Paul Levitz, Wally Wood stuff with Power Girl and the Star Spangled Kid and that kind of thing. And I don't know. It was also just really cool to learn that there was a legacy with this shit. They're like, oh, there was a Golden Age Hawkman, and then this Hawkman, and now this Hawkman. It was like every door I opened in the world of superheroes just opened another door, and there was something like cooler and cooler and cooler behind it. And the Justice Society was one of the first things I saw like that. Like, there are how many Green Lantern? This Green Lantern, his weakness is wood. Why does that Flash guy have a fucking weird hat on? You know, I mean,
right.
So that's me. I don't know how y'all feel about the Justice Society, but that's basically, you know, that's a bunch of like weird mishmash things that all come together to, they are my favorite superhero team.
Okay. I think I got a hold of something from the library that had all the crossovers for, you know, like where the JLA and JSA would cross over.
Yeah.
So a Crisis, probably on Crisis on Two Earths or something. I can't remember.
Crisis on Earths 1 and 2.
There you go.
That's the very first one where they met.
Yeah, that is probably I was a mark for crossovers.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I didn't care who it contained, if Marvel, DC, whatever, I couldn't wait to see what they were trying to do to get those stories told with those two characters in it.
I think you and I too, like, were socioeconomically similar. You didn't have a lot of money, so if you could get a comic book that had like 30 superheroes in it as opposed to like 2, that's the one you wanted. You're gonna get a lot more bang for your buck, right?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. You know, one of the things that they flesh out here with the Spectre and the Spear of Destiny in this issue is about the fact that how there was like this, what they call it, a field of influence or something where like magic-based things could not go across, or Hitler would gain control.
The DC universe canonically explained why the superheroes didn't just go win World War II.
Honestly, I think that is a great way of explaining it. I was thinking about that today.
No, hard disagree. Hard disagree.
How would you explain it then?
I would do what they did at Marvel with the Invaders, where it's like, why doesn't Namor just go kill Hitler? Well, because Hitler's got 15 super people who are always surrounded by. Like, come up with better stuff. The Justice Society of America, arguably the most powerful superhero of all time, can't go fight in the European theater because of magic MacGuffins. It's like,
hey, they can't go to the Pacific Theater either.
Well, whatever. Come on, you know what I meant. Like, it's nonsense. It's like, you're telling me you don't want to have stories where they're fighting, they're like in Berlin, they're liberating camps, they're doing all the cool stuff the Invaders got to. You don't want to see Alan Scott in Paris. Like, come on, this is nonsense.
I mean, you're acting like this never happened. Like, there's stuff like the JSA Liberty Files.
Oh, I know.
There's stuff in All-Star Squadron.
They needed
a canonical reason why they couldn't just go do it all the time. And this is as good as any. You have to think about, like, when this was like done, you're talking about the DC superheroes. So why doesn't Superman and Wonder Woman and the Spectre and Dr. Fate, they're a lot more powerful than Captain America and Namor and Bucky. You know, I mean, I think that's part of the problem too. You could believe that it would take the Invaders like half a year to somehow fight from Italy all the way to Berlin. If you let Superman and Spectre in there, the war's over in 5 minutes.
All right, fine. Maybe the Spear of Destiny and the other magical items are why the Spectre cannot end everything else. And the Nazis were known occultists. Like, fine, that makes sense. But like, literally, like, this is a recurring motif as to why the Justice Society didn't have more like battles there. I always viewed it as a cop-out. It's like, they're not gods, they have weaknesses, just create more villains for them to fight. Like, I don't know.
I was just gonna say, I didn't realize it was the whole Justice Society. I only thought it was the Spectre. When I was reading this,
no, it's the whole Justice Society.
I mean, other guys have gone like, okay, like Dr. Midnight and Hourman canonically did like missions. It was only the ones that were like super powerful, like Green Lantern and Dr. Fate. The Spectre couldn't go, but like the Atom punched some Nazis in Europe. I think part of the problem is this is something that was done decades later, because at the time the reason they didn't have Superman go fight the Nazis is because they thought it would be they literally thought it would be bad for the morale of Americans.
Okay.
Like, this would just be a bad show, because he's Superman. You could do that with, like, Captain America punches Nazis all the time in his 40s books, but Superman doesn't do that so much. He deals with some saboteurs and stuff like that. And, like, the idea was that, like, it wouldn't be good. It just, like, morale would somehow affect morale. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it meant that, like, 40 years later, when assholes like us are looking at this stuff, somebody had to explain why they didn't just go do it. And I think this is as good as any 40 years later.
Okay.
The other example I always point to, other than the Invaders, and Dean's right, the Invaders were, first of all, they came later. They were a retcon themselves, and they're much, much less powerful. The other thing
they fought the Nazis in their time canonically, which Superman and Wonder Woman didn't really do at the time.
Sure.
Unless they came here. Like, Cap parachuted into fucking wherever.
The other one that was a contemporary of the Justice Society that I'm a huge fan of and that'll never get reprinted again is Shazam versus the Monster Society of Evil. And there's a couple of issues where the Monster Society actually includes as its members every single leader of an Axis power nation. Like they're literally drawn in panel reporting to Mr. Mind. And Shazam and his family have to stop them. And that book skewed even younger to Dean's point. Like that no one took that book seriously, but I always laugh because it's like, what was Hitler and the others doing during the 40s of the Fawcett comics? Well, they were listening to a Venusian mindworm as Shazam, punched out whatever super mecha thing they had built that month. So, I mean, there's different ways to take this. I personally, I always viewed the Justice Society way as a cop-out. But I also don't share Dean's love of this stuff. I'm happy to see that you, Jesse, thought it was just the Spectre, because that would have made way more sense to me.
I do want to bring up the other moment, the big moment that's in this book, in this issue, and that is when Hazard begins to realize it seems like the Spectre is, as he's been on this earth, he's definitely changing in some way. I think the phrase that he uses is that the more times he spends with humanity, like the more human he becomes.
Yes.
Is that what it was?
And there's some truth to that. Part of the problem with like the Spectre is if he gets separated from a human host or he's not around humans for a while, he loses his ability to perceive like humanity. And again, like I said earlier, if the Spectre decided to judge us, we would all be found unworthy.
The moment that I was talking about is when Carter and Shira call upon the Spectre to bring their son back. That's where, that's
rough, buddy.
It is a rough scene. It really is. And Darry, another heavy instance in this book right there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And he shows up and he's like, "What do you guys want?" And they're like, "Can you bring our son back?" I mean, listen, I can't even imagine what their grief is. I'm sure it's immeasurable, but to a point where you're just like, "Bring my son back." And it's not like there's a bit of compassion in the voice of the Spectre. He's just like, "Okay, I can't do that. Your son is dead." It's
like there's nowhere to come back to. He's got no body.
There's nothing.
Right. What are you talking about? It's
exactly.
not part of the plan.
And they beg him, "Okay, look, just bring back his ghost. We just want to say goodbye. That's all we want to do is say goodbye to our son." He's like, "Even if I could, I would not. That's not why I'm here." And then he left. And it's rough.
To be fair, of course he was cold. These people he hasn't seen in a long time, show up out of nowhere, and they're not like, "Hey, man, how's it going? Hey, Spectre, how are you? How have you been?" They're like, "Hey, do us a favor. And by the way, this favor is bring our dead son back to life." Can you imagine? He was super insulted. That's rude.
It's rude. That's rude, Carter Hall.
No, I understand. I understand.
I want to give this issue kind of a bit of a spotlight because honestly, I think it is one of my favorite out of this series. I love Superman fighting at the end here. But this gives you a little bit of history, and there is a massive history of the Justice Society. But this whole Ragnarok thing that's going on, Dean, can you shed any light on that? Is that what happened in the comics? Is these guys got stuck in limbo?
Yeah.
And
at one point they got stuck in limbo fighting Ragnarok. Again and again they would die, and then the Midgard or the Asgardian bad guys would die, and then they just do it all again. And I believe in Armageddon Inferno in the 90s, somehow they're able to come back, and they're still, since they were in limbo, they hadn't really aged or anything, a whole lot.
Fair enough.
So that's where they were, and that canonically happened. I think it happened from the end of the last days of the Justice Society until Armageddon Inferno. Number 4, I want to say.
Let's talk about Superman.
Let's do it.
I mean, Superman is given the Spear of Destiny and told to go talk to the Spectre and let's see what happens. Meanwhile, Naiad is just wrecking Tokyo, flooding people out, drowning people left and right. Spectre's now showed up. He's talking to Gaia. The
ice daggers thing was particularly brutal.
Oh, yeah, dude, where she sent them up into the atmosphere and they just came back down, like just shredded people. And the guy that gets killed, like the oil exec that comes out and he drank the water and his face explodes.
Yeah. He looks like, I used to play Predator 2 on the Sega Genesis a fucking ton. And like when you would walk, like it would, the 3 dots, like from the Predator, like they would start falling. You had to walk away. If you stayed in one spot too long, they would show up. And if you kept staying there, it would land on you. And then you would die. And this eye would like come towards the screen, like, so it reminded me a lot of that because, good times, great oldies.
Oh, yeah, buddy. You can't go wrong with an eyeball coming at you.
But yeah, what a disgusting panel in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And that ties into, kind of another Spectre legacy. Like I said, in the 70s, there's some grisly Spectre comics, by Michael Fleischer and Jim Aparo. Really good stuff in Adventure Comics, but also like I said, pretty grisly. They actually had an animated short that was like inspired by them on the DC showcase Black Adam versus Superman and Shazam, and that is like a really great little cartoon. So
yeah, that one was really good.
Yeah, if you ever want to know a lot about the Spectre, like that's probably all the best of the Spectre rolled into one.
All right, well, Darry, what'd you think of Superman showing up here and going toe to toe with the Spectre?
I loved the scene of him in the Oval Office with his post-resurrection long hockey hair. It reminded me very much of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, where, Reagan calls him in and says, well, you got to deal with your friends, son. And here it's kind of the same way, showing that Superman will always have a fealty to the office and to someone who represents the establishment, whether it's the Gipper or Bubba here. So I did like that. I thought that was an interesting way to set it up. I liked it too because I wasn't expecting it. Granted, I was expecting it because 22 was the first one I read many, many years ago. But I love the way it's set up here, where they want a way to control the Spectre. They find this weapon. They give it to the person they think is completely trustworthy to it, and then the second he is out the door, they realize, oh no, we just gave Hitler Superman's body, and I feel like that was a great turnaround. And then in perfect Ostrander fashion, the way the plot is wrapped up by having Spectre show him a fake dream and having Superman's innate nobility win over, it almost has like an EC Comics feel. The Spectre and EC, they kind of live in the same part of my brain, even though he predates them. But I thought it was great. And there's this panel that I kept laughing at in the 4th issue where Batman is with a gun and a cyborg eye and a bandolier, and he looks like something out of the DCEU. And Superman's just like, that gun's got kryptonite bullets. Good. And then it ends and Batman's cape fades into the green cape of the Spectre. And I thought that was a really good way to wrap this up.
I like how he has one kryptonite bullet, but like he has a bandolier person. You don't need that bandolier. What are you doing? You got one bullet. We've seen that. We know you've only got one little thing. Also, that cyborg guy, I had an action figure in the 90s. It was like from like the Legends of Batman series called like Cyborg Batman. It looked a lot like this one, but I think it comes from Robin 3000. But had that same like red eye effect. Cool shit.
No,
I misspoke. I don't even think it's a cyborg eye. I think it's just because he's holding the gun like in the crux of his arm, but I guess he wants to make sure he doesn't miss because he's got one bullet. I don't know. I do like Tom Mandrake as an artist, but sometimes I really got to pay attention to what is going on in the pages.
I mean, is this a battle of the century kind of thing here? Like, how many times has Spectre and Superman gone toe to toe? Is this the first?
I don't know of any prior to this, but I know they fight later in like the DC 2000 series.
Yeah, I know.
Basically JSA versus JLA.
I don't think they fought before this because you have to remember, and some of the Justice Society members allude to this, but this is not even 10 years removed from Crisis on Infinite Earths. And before then, Superman and the Justice Society hadn't been on the same world for 40 years or some nonsense. There is an Earth 2 Superman, but he's not he's not the Silver Age flying from galaxy to galaxy Superman. He's the reformed social crusader version of the character. So I don't think the two of them really would have had it out like this until now. I think that's one of the reasons that this is such a solid story, because you're really not expecting it, and then you can see Superman's heel turn is very believable, and that kind of puts the Spectre, forces him to say, well, this is kind of your fault because you went off the freaking rails. How are you going to fix this? And again, it's like, well, I'm going to let his nobility come through because that's what I have learned. Like, if a person is good and you give them the opportunity to be so, they will surprise you. I thought that was a great way of wrapping up the storyline. I
mean, if you got Superman versus the Spectre on the cover, Darry's going to be picking it up. I'll probably pick it up if I would have seen it. I mean, my goodness, that is, if you knew who the Spectre was and what you're wanting to know, what could possibly bring these two against each other and who is going to walk away the winner if that happens. Now, I know how comics work, but back then you didn't know. You didn't know what was going to happen. And the way that this story is told, it's like you're reading the page and all of a sudden Superman is plunging that spear right into the Spectre and like, oh, I didn't see this coming. Oh, and then of course, I got shades of the Black Mercy was kind of going through my head where I was, and I was like, okay, all right, I see what's happening here. But yeah, I mean, still a great small bit of story told about how like all of the superheroes are like just going after him. And of course, Superman, he's got two weaknesses. Yeah, you got kryptonite, but magic he doesn't do so well against either. Yep. And this is, it is this spear has corrupted him. I thought it was great. So Dean, go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great too. I mean, you get to see like this grand fight. Naiad's destroying Tokyo. The Spectre and Gaia are dueling philosophically while this happens. They're accusing each other of being hypocrites. They're probably both right. And then remember, there's that one moment where that guy, like, she's flooding that office, and the guy's like, oh, the toilets must be leaking again. And he's putting his foot in the water. And I was like, bro, if the toilets are leaking, if you think that's toilet water, why would you put your foot in there? You gotta be smarter than that. You gotta have a plan. Like the guy from the Carnage concert, Madison Square Garden, he had a plan. He was ready to go. He wanted his knife in there. He got it in there. And
let me tell you,
what's his plan?
What would the guy at the Madison Square Garden, the knife guy, could he have done with the spear? Now think about that. What kind of a world would we have been living in?
Honestly, if he had the spear, the Spectre would have done the same thing to him, but like inverted. Like it would have been about like you'd have been like, oh, good. Well, now you're in charge of the world. Here comes the Suicide Squad. Now here comes Superman. Now here comes this guy. You're never going to get the rest. How about that? Now you get to fight all the armies. Blah, blah. He's like, I'm tired of this. And he'd give it up. He's like, yeah, you're too weak for the spear, son. That's probably what he would have done.
What I love is that you could have left it when I asked the question, but nope. You looked to the sky and your brain was gone. I could see it. And I was like, he's going to provide an answer. And why would
I not provide an answer?
Why wouldn't
old Jesse ask a question, then Dean Compton's going to answer it?
Damn right.
I do think that like one of the cool things about this fight is like straight up, if they fought, like the Spectre's going to destroy Superman. Superman can't really do anything to him. But this is a great equalizer where you're like, all of a sudden, the game has changed. It's definitely a great story for really everybody involved. Superman's like, I have a lot to think about because maybe I'm not as incorruptible as I thought, And Spectre's like, I have a lot to think about because, maybe powerful people, can like eschew the temptation that comes with power that leads a lot of people to engage in, malevolent and tyrannical behavior. Naiad's got some stuff, and Gaia have some stuff to think about. Like, what does balance really mean? How does that work? The Spectre says a great thing when he killed everybody in Blotva and fucking caused a volcano. It caused a lot of pollution, as volcanoes do. A volcano was primarily responsible, I believe, for 1816, which was the year without a summer. Like a volcano had exploded across like the earth, and like it made temperatures and like weather fucking crazy because there was so much soot and ash had been shot up there and shit, right? he atoned for that, and then Superman was like, well, do it all with all the pollution. I'm only responsible for this. Humanity's got to find its own way. Part of that is the Spectre's judgment in the DC universe, but part of that is also going to be what Darry said, allowing the people who have goodness in their heart to find a path that is sometimes rocky and sometimes barred by thorns, to get by those thorns with the scrapes and bruises and lacerations necessary to come out the person they always wanted to be and the person that they are on the other side. And that's why I like this comic book so much when it comes to the Spectre. Like, yeah, maybe if I had been a little younger, and I was, somewhat precocious, so I did like him at the time.
You're still somewhat precocious.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's the young man's term. But like, I like when, I guess Kurt Busiek said it, like, where he's like, I like when you can have like the personification of fear and the personification of speed have a conflict and have something meaningful come out of it. The Spectre comic does a great job of having conflicts where, like, you don't necessarily get like a hard, cut and dry, this is the answer you're looking for, but you get all the material you need to find your answer, wherever this, would lead you. And I love it when superhero comic books are more than just superhero comic books without turning into like pretentious drivel. And this one does a great job of being more than a superhero comic, but never ever being too heavy-handed or too like into its own bullshit, like spilling its own parts. Doesn't do that.
Right.
If Superman and the Spectre were going to fight, like really had a reason to throw down and it had to be stopped, they could have the personification of Jerry Siegel himself, show up like one of the 7 unknown men of Slaughter Swamp. Just be boys, don't do this. Don't fight on my behalf. And then the Spectre would be like, oh yeah, you have suffered enough. And then he would just go away and Clark would go back to doing whatever Clark does.
Maybe they could run into him like the way the Fantastic Four met Jack Kirby.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking of that scene from Wade and Ringo's Fantastic Four. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
I asked ChatGPT who would win in a fight just to see what they said.
Why are you trying to replace us? The future is truly here.
Ultimately, the result of such a battle is open to interpretation and can vary depending upon the creative direction and the writers in specific circumstances. Is that not like the biggest BS answer you ever heard?
It's true, though. It's true.
The problem with it, like,
if the fight happens in Action Comics, he's going to get an anti-magic suit, and that's going to be that. If it happens in a book called The Spectre, Clark's going down. He is.
Yeah, like I said, in a vacuum, I think the Spectre takes him a lot, but like we can always, any good creator can come up with a way for Superman to reasonably beat the Spectre and vice versa. So that's just the answer. That's the answer to all superhero comics. And I'm surprised at how many adult superhero fans there are who want that to not be the answer. Right. Who like wildly fucking think that there's somehow, like, we can have fun with it and debate back and forth, but they really want to definitively say like, no way, Ultra Magnus would totally beat Machine Man. Who fucking knows, buddy? Like, whichever way we want to write it, we can do it. Squirrel beat Galactus. Like, you can do anything you want. That's part of the beauty of superhero comics. It's not just like, straight up on paper. Like, Batman figures out how to beat guys stronger than him all the time. Punisher does too. Superman, like, does stupid stuff so that people compete with him. I like discussing it with y'all, but I don't like it when people try and say that their opinion of a fake fucking fight between fake fucking superheroes is somehow definitive.
I want to say that I could not be a bigger Ultra Magnus fan, but there is no way he does not lose in a fight to Machine Man. I'm putting that out there. The Machine Man's going to beat Ultra Magnus.
I would probably agree. Yeah, but at the same time, if there was a comic book where Ultra Magnus beat him, would it set you off?
No, of course not.
Yeah, because you can see a plausible way for this giant fucking robot commander semi-truck to beat, a robot. A great robot, mind you, with your stretchy arms and a really advanced brain and supervision and shit. But, I think he usually wins because he's cooler and he does cooler shit. But Ultra Magnus is too indecisive. That's a big problem with him.
What would be a cool story for that is Machine Man is vaguely based on Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
And he's also got some connection to like the Black Monoliths from that movie. And it'd be great if he was fighting Ultra Magnus and he's like, oh, I may not be able to beat you. Let me evolve you. And then the toy, and then he breaks down into the smaller toy where it's just the white Optimus Prime. That'd be a great way of wrapping that up. I'm just saying.
Jesus Christ.
I'd buy that 2-pack is all I'm saying. Hasbro, I know you're listening to this. Give me that 2-pack.
Broke everything.
I know. That's what I do.
I thought you were going to have a thing where, like, you know, Primus had something to do with the obelisks or something.
Oh, I like that. You know, the way Primus is drawn sometimes, it really doesn't look any different than a Celestial. So I'm buying this. I'm buying this.
Anything left unsaid, boys, about the Spear of Destiny?
All I would say is that if you were unaware of this series or you haven't read it, pick it up. It's a good time. Really a solid 4-issue run. Again, you really can't go wrong with John Ostrander. I can't think of anything off the top of my head I wouldn't recommend to someone. It's a good comic. It's again, I don't love every single page of it, but that's not the point. It's good and it's enjoyable, and the art holds up. And if nothing else, these covers are phenomenal. Alex Ross did issue 22. Bill Sienkiewicz did issue 20. I'm not familiar with who did 19 and 21, but again, both look like posters that should have been hanging on the wall of a comic book store back in the day. So just really solid stuff, even 30 years later.
This was our coverage of the Spectre issues 19 through 22, Spear of Destiny. Let's get into plugs. Dean Compton, tell us about the Unspoken Decade.
Yes, we're the unspokendecade.com. We're on Facebook. Really want to send a shout out. Like, we've gotten a lot of traffic lately, so anybody who's listening, who's helping with that traffic, I mean, we're having like 1,000 likes on some stuff. We're getting like 50 shares, 60 shares.
Wow.
Some really good comments going back and forth. We've done a good job, I think, of purging a lot of some negative people who've been around there, and we'll continue to do so. It's we stay very positive. We have a lot of fun, and so that's where we're at. Send me a Blue Sky invite if you've got one. We'd really like to get on Blue Sky. I tell you what, probably going to be abandoning Twitter, X, or whatever Elon Musk is calling it this week, because I can't do it no more. And that's where you can find us. And we hope to see you there. Drop us a line, man.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, you can check out the Source Material Comics podcast feed on any podcatcher. You're probably listening to that right now. But we got all sorts of great shows here. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to check out the Superblog Team Up. I've participated in the Superblog Team Up a couple times over the past few years. And it's a lot of great people that you get to enjoy what they write about comic books and listen to some podcasts. And I participated by doing a podcast. We are celebrating, this last one we did, we're celebrated 60 years of Avengers and X-Men. And we did that, my own personal one solo shot, by comparing and contrasting Ultron versus Nimrod. And I got an AI's perspective on that. And it was a lot of fun. It was about 30 minutes. I feel
like that's such a terrible idea. You're like, hey, which of these killer fucking robots is better? I'll ask a robot.
It got real interesting when I was like, hey, what kind of bands would Ultron listen to? Type in hashtag SBTU on Twitter. You should be able to find all the great contributions that we had out there. That's it. We're out of here. Dean Compton right there. Darry Waits up there. I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Rattlich Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.